Hi, everyone. Continuing with our theme of clashing cultures, this PowerPoint covers the revival of the Ku Klux Klan in the 1920s. It's one of the best examples of cultural conflict that happened during that decade as the Klan rapidly expanded to an eventual peak membership of about 5 million Americans. So let's do a quick overview of this and try to understand why it happened. The roots of the Klan as an organization go back to after the Civil War. The first Klan chapter was established by a group of Confederate veterans in the state of Tennessee, and other chapters sprang up in states around the South. There were similar organizations throughout the South after the Civil War with the purpose of terrorizing black citizens to discourage them from voting and, in the words of white Southerners, to keep them in their place even though slavery had been abolished. And the Klan was particularly active during the late 1860s through the 1870s, engaged in frequent violence. Hundreds of people died at the hands of the Klan in violent acts after the Civil War. It never went away, but its presence declined somewhat after the U.S. government halted its reconstruction efforts of the South, plus Southern states passed a complex series of laws, the Black Codes, as they were known collectively, that restricted the lives of Black Americans in myriad ways. The revival of the Klan happened for several reasons, and one of the key stimulants for this was the release of the film The Birth of a Nation, directed by D.W. Griffith in 1915. This was a movie that presented a completely romanticized, distorted image of the Klan as this heroic, chivalrous organization, almost like King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And the film was extremely popular. Film historians consider it an extremely influential movie. It was a movie that used a lot of techniques that are common now but weren't at the time. The silent film. But D.W. Griffith did a lot of things that made it very exciting to audiences at the time. For instance, instead of having stationary cameras, he frequently had his cameras moving along with the action, making it look like you were right in the middle of the riders themselves on horseback. It's an extremely racist film. No one in the movie is black. Anybody who portrays a black person in the film is a white actor in blackface. It was picketed against and protested against by Black Americans, but President Woodrow Wilson even screened it in the White House, saying that his only regret about the movie was that it was all so terribly true. Absolutely ridiculous. But Wilson himself was a Southerner who was extremely racist in his views, so not shocking that he found this film appealing to his sensibilities. Controversial film, but it reinforced a lot of negative stereotypes that many white Americans held about black citizens. And so a former Methodist minister named William Simmons saw The Birth of a Nation as an opportunity to revive the Klan, which he did in a ceremony in Stone Mountain, Georgia in 1915. And Simmons had ambitions to make the Klan a national organization. He was only partially successful as the Klan grew slowly. But a rival and eventual successor that you see pictured here, Hiram Evans, who was a former dentist from Dallas and initially head of the Dallas chapter of the Klan. When Evans ousted Simmons in a power move and took over the organization, he used mass marketing to market the Klan, as I note here, as a patriotic, Christian, family-friendly organization. To be a member of the Klan, you had to be a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, and the Klan had an extensive agenda, which I'm going to go into in the next slide. But as I said, it presented itself as family-friendly. There were women auxiliary Klan groups, activities for children, family outings, all sorts of things to kind of belie the violence that had been and still was very much a part of the Klan agenda. So the Klan had publications, a national newspaper, and various Klan chapters put out their own newsletters too, and it was popular in areas, well, really across the country, not just the South. Very strong and active in the Midwest and Western states. You see this picture of an auditorium full of Klan members in Seattle in 1923. Eastern states like New Jersey, the Klan was extremely active as well. Here's a picture of a Klan wedding from 1926. Klan parade in the medium-sized town of Springfield, Ohio from 1923. The Klan used parades, especially parades at night, as a display of power, pageantry, and to let residents know that the Klan was a presence in their community, and also served the function of intimidating Black residents and those who the Klan targeted. The Klan was anti-Black. It was also anti-Jewish. It was staunchly anti-Catholic. And this broad agenda appealed to an array of people. The anti-Catholicism stemmed from the fact that immigration patterns to the United States had changed. Prior to the American Civil War, most immigrants to the United States came from Northern and Western Europe. So you had Germans, you had French, people from Scandinavian countries, Brits, Scots, Irish. After the Civil War, immigration patterns changed, and large numbers of immigrants were coming from Eastern and Southern Europe. A lot of Slavic people, Italians, Greeks, and the majority of these immigrants were Catholic. So the Klan was anti-immigrant, also anti-Catholic. So this diverse agenda or broad agenda that the Klan had made it more appealing to a broader array of people. Hiram Evans ran the Klan on kind of a business model too. You had to pay an annual membership to be an active member of the Klan. You had to buy Klan material such as the robe, the sash, the hood. That was all sold separately. You could subscribe to the Klan newspaper, which marketed other Klan-approved products. It became an extremely profitable organization, which also led to a lot of corruption among Klan leadership. And the heightened racism of the 1920s is perhaps best exemplified by the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921. Worst race massacre in American history. Rumors, which were false, of a sexual assault by a young black man on a young white woman in downtown Tulsa set off hundreds of rampaging white citizens armed, storming into the main black residential area of Tulsa, middle-class neighborhood, the Greenwood district. And it was destroyed. Most of it burned to the ground. Hundreds of residents killed. We don't know how many. Even to this day, many victims were buried in mass graves. On the low end, estimates run about 150 to 200 people, but there are estimates as high as 700 to 800 victims of the Tulsa Race Massacre. And the Klan's political influence is not only at the state level, but at the national level, where in 1924, the U.S. Congress passed the Immigration Act of 1924. Eric Foner talks about this, also known as the Johnson-Reed Act, which was the basis of U.S. immigration policy until it was finally revised in 1965. So this is in place over 4 decades. And it established race-based quotas that went back to the 1890 census instead of the more diverse 1920 census. And it set quotas that discriminated against non-white immigrants, limiting their numbers drastically, practically cut off immigration from China and Japan entirely. It was praised by a young upstart politician in Germany named Adolf Hitler, who thought this was a good example of a nation preventing immigrants from coming. The downfall of the Klan happened fairly rapidly and resulted primarily from a scandal involving this man, David Curtis Stevenson, who was leader of the Klan in Indiana. Stevenson was an ambitious person who was actively seeking national Klan leadership. He had been very crafty in expanding Klan influence in the state of Indiana. This picture you see of Klansmen exiting a church in a small town in Indiana exemplifies one of the things Stevenson did, where he would have Klan members show up just before the collection point in Protestant churches across the state, and they would make an offering. The offering would be accepted by the minister and blessed, which seemed to indicate, approval of the Klan's presence. So it was a very shrewd way to, again, reinforce this idea of the Klan being a Christian organization, but also letting people know, as parades did, that the Klan was a presence in town. Stevenson was a complete hypocrite who, as spokesman for the Klan, leader for the Klan, supported prohibition. Remember, there was an amendment in place that had been passed just before the beginning of the 1920s prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and consumption of alcohol. In reality, Stevenson was a heavy drinker, really an alcoholic. Stevenson talked about the Klan defending the purity of white womanhood, when in reality, Stevenson was a sexual predator himself. And one of the women that Stevenson had a sexual interest in, you see pictured here, Madge Oberholzer, worked as a teacher and also worked in the State House in Indiana and the state capital, Indianapolis, which is where Stevenson first encountered her. She turned down his requests for a date. Eventually, he had his bodyguards kidnap her, force her aboard his private railroad car, which was attached to a train traveling from Indianapolis to Chicago. There, in his railroad car, Stevenson repeatedly sexually assaulted her, raped her several times, literally bit her all over her body, then took her back to his home in Indianapolis, where he put her in a loft apartment above his garage, refused to allow her to get medical treatment, finally allowed a doctor to see her 36 hours later, and the doctor said she was not going to survive her injuries, and she died within 3 weeks. But before her death, dictated a statement detailing what had happened. That statement became the basis of charging Stevenson with murder. Stevenson was completely smug throughout this trial. He didn't believe that a jury in the state of Indiana would convict the leader of the Klan. He was genuinely shocked when he was convicted, sentenced to life in prison. Even then, he assumed the governor, who was a Klan-backed candidate, would pardon him. When that didn't happen, Stevenson released to an Indiana newspaper that had been critical of the Klan a secret list he had of everybody in the state who had accepted money from the Klan. This included state politicians, judges, police chiefs, ministers, caused a huge scandal in the state. The Stevenson trial got a lot of attention, generated a lot of bad publicity for the Klan, and led to a mass exodus of membership. So by the early 1930s, the Klan is a fraction of the size it had been in its peak in the mid-1920s. It never goes away, but it never again is a national organization on the scope that it was in the 20s. So again, the rise and fall of the Klan in the 20s, a classic example of this cultural conflict that I've referenced and emphasized as a theme, with Klan ideology appealing to a broad range of fears and prejudices that many white Americans possessed at the time.